Good morning, everyone. Could you hold up your phones really quickly? Some of you are already holding them up. Great. That's good. I would like to tell you that you are all cyborgs. You don't have to be RoboCop or Terminator to be a cyborg. Every time you use a piece of technology or a tool, you're acting in a technosocial relationship. And our tools were originally to extend the capability of our fists, or a knife to extend the capability of our teeth. But actually, even though we think of cyborgs as Terminator or RoboCop, cyborg came from a 1960 paper on space travel. The idea is that you add a technology to yourself in order to adapt to a new environment. And every day in modern society, our new environment requires that we have these phones with us, these kind of wormholes that allow us to press a button, whisper something, and be heard on the other side of the world. Somebody adding this many components to their body allows them to be in a place that humans should not be. Our entire history is us alongside tools. We use them to adapt, we use them to live. But now we're in an era in which it's not only the physical extensions of ourselves, but the mental extensions of ourselves. And in fact, there's been quotes that maybe 50 billion devices could be online by 2020. It's not just us communicating with devices, but devices being on a social network communicating with each other. So when I see a quote like this, I like to ask, does this actually sound good? Is it great that we'll have 50 billion devices? Do we even have the resources to get over 50 billion devices? So let's consider some things, like the smartwatch that sends you notifications from your phone. Maybe it's more convenient because you don't need to look at your phone as much. But when we try to make everything smart, like the smart fridge that tells you when the bananas have gone bad, we don't need a smart fridge to tell us the bananas have gone bad. The bananas have a peel. It changes color. It tells you. Do we need smarter technology, or do we need smarter humans? How much should we put into our technology? How many of you have more time because of technology? Okay, follow. These two people have it figured out. Talk to them after the lecture. The original promise of tech was to free up our time, to make us more human. That at some point in the future, which keeps getting pushed out further and further, we would have enough technology that we wouldn't have to work anymore, that we would be free to be human again. Yet, technology like a gas seems to fill every single available space in our life. It's like a phone is like a new cigarette. Oh, you have nothing to do? Oh, I'm bored. Oh, I wake up in the morning. Now we have these things next to us that cry, and we have to pick them up and soothe them back to sleep. They get hungry, and we have to plug them into the wall and feed them. We take care of them better than we do ourselves. Sometimes we wake up and we look at them before we look at our significant other. What happens when everything in our life becomes smart technology? When we have the home of the future? When we buy all of the new things? You get what I like to call the dystopian kitchen of the future? It's a thing in which everything has a notification. Everything is trying to talk to you. Everything has a bad battery life. It's all connected to the web, so it takes up more bandwidth than Netflix. So you're trying to watch your favorite movie, but your fridge is communicating over it, so you can't do it. Everything requires a software update or a hardware update. And lastly, hackers are constantly trying to hack into your fridge and your home appliances so that they can Bitcoin mine and do other things with it. This is a future that maybe we want, maybe we don't want. But I don't know about you, but when I go home, I don't want to have to be a system administrator in my own home. I just want to go home to be home. When we start making technology that's closer to supporting human life, we can't build it like we do a desktop application. We can't build it like we do Twitter. Early Twitter would fail, and there was a fail well, and it was funny. We would laugh, oh, Twitter's down, no big deal. But this startup, PetNet, said, You don't have to worry about feeding or watering your animals. You could even Skype them. You could see them in real time. People thought, great, we'll buy this kit. And what happened was that the feeding schedule was set up to a remote server. And the server one day failed, and the pets were stranded. People couldn't Skype them. They didn't know whether they were alive or dead, the new Schrodinger's cat. And we had this big issue where people had no clue. And yet they put the trust in this software and hardware because the application developers said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about feeding and watering your pet. We have it taken care of. This is technology. You can trust technology. It's the future. And in the future, in all of the videos and movies that you see, you can always talk to a machine and they'll understand you the first time. Even if you have an accent, no worries. In the future, everything is perfect. Everything is glossy. In the future, nothing breaks. Or you have a dystopian future where everything is broken. I don't want either of those futures. What about a middle future? We're not going to have all one future. We're going to have ranges. We need to have the choice of what future we want. When programmers sell a company and they get wealthy, a lot of them either take a trip down to South America to take an ayahuasca ritual to maybe get the culture that they lost from programming, or they buy a farm and they start to work with the original code that grows out of the ground. I went and looked at PetNet, and I said, is there any responsibility? And the terms of service said, you agree not to rely on our service for the well-being of your animal. We are not responsible if your animal dies, yet we promised that this new technology would make your life easier. So it's really important to think, are there any ethics associated with this technology? We removed ethics in school, we removed art and culture and music and philosophy and all of these things because they're considered, unnecessary. We'll just have tech, and tech will replace everything. In fact, you could upload your brain into a box and that's no problem. What about human time? When I talk to people and I say, when you're not working, what are you doing? I say, well, I'm eating with family. Even the most intense tech person, the minute they have a child, everything is about that child. They really want to be human. The Greeks had this concept of chronos time and kairos time. And in chronos time, it's the idea that you have a meeting from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. And within that meeting, you can only do the certain things in that meeting. Maybe towards the end of the meeting, you find out what you really want to do, and the meeting is over. You go on a corporate retreat with your company, you figure out what you really need to do in the company, and then you get back, and oh no, there's an emergency, we have to cancel everything, we can never work on that. Kairos time is the time of falling in love. It's the time of a sunset. It's the eureka moment that Archimedes had when he figured out density. It's the time when you're not necessarily thinking about something. We think that if we add so much more tech to our lives and we fill every single moment up with a social network, that we'll be more innovative and we'll think better and we'll be more creative. And yet I'm talking to these Nobel laureates and it's about being childlike and exploring something that nobody else cares about at the time and thinking, what if? It's about reading a book. Because a book, when you read it, you're adding your imagination to it. And that makes it a part of you. You dissolve into that technology. And because you're adding something to it, that's what brings it to life. So much of what we do now is consuming more than we create. So how can we be the humans we want to be innovative and interesting, if all of our time is filled up by unnecessary notifications, worrying about whether our battery runs out, and trying to automate everything? If we have an era of interruptive technology, which I would suggest all of you at some point today, take 5 minutes, look at your phone and ask yourself, how many of the notifications that are being sent to you are actually from a human? How many of them are from a machine? And how often when your phone beeps do you actually look at it? You can go into settings, you can turn most all of them off. You could turn your phone to airplane mode and determine when you're going to look at it. And it's hard to do. Part of what we have to do is train ourselves to do it. So we really need the opposite. of an interruptive technology. If we're going to go into the future and actually build things, we need a calm technology. And this is not my idea. This is from Xerox PARC in the 80s and 90s. I was writing my thesis on mobile phones in 2007, right when the iPhone came out. I noticed that people were starting to hold their phones like this and absorb into the phone. And it was this big transition moment from clicking on a T9 keyboard really fast or a cool Motorola Razr phone to a complete absorption. And I showed up on some archive.org site, and I found this paper called The Coming Age of Calm Technology. And there was also a paper called The World is Not a Desktop. And they said, in the future, we will have lots of technology. Technology will be really cheap, but the scarce resource will be our attention. And how technology makes or breaks our attention will make or break our future. These papers were written in the 80s and 90s. They read just like a paper today. They don't read like a research paper. They can be read by anybody. I went online and I made a website and I put all the research on the website to try and bring it back to life. Xerox PARC is where we got the graphic user interface. It's where we got Ethernet. It's where we got a lot of modern technology. And we didn't get the technology because it was just a bunch of researchers and technologists in a room. It was because the people at Xerox PARC understood that we needed to hire artists, anthropologists, liberal arts people to counter the technology so that we could make a human-machine interface that worked in harmony. You can't have one without the other. If we have a future that's pure technology, we have automated systems in an airport that you get stuck in because you as a human accidentally bent your boarding pass. And because it's automated, when it fails, it's over. This is Mark Weiser's original quote on invisible tools. He says, "A good tool is invisible. It's not in your face. If it's really good, you focus on the task and not the tool. When you're a carpenter and you use a hammer or a hand tool, you become one with it. It extends you. They're friendly, human-scale tools. Right now, when we're using Facebook's algorithm, it makes us upset, because if we're upset, we're on the site longer, we're more likely to click on things, and if we're on the site longer and click on things, they make money. So these websites are profiting off of our misery. There's only one way to present yourself online, and that's the template itself of the social network. Here is the box for you. Here is where you put your photo, and this is how you will behave. The interface is the culture. And there is this very depressive culture that's permeating through the world because depression is profitable. Early on, you would make your own chat room or forum, and if you didn't like it, you could leave and make another one. If somebody was suicidal or getting abused, you could kick them out. At this large scale, you don't know who's running the show. You don't know the individual engineer who wrote that code. And if you do put a support ticket in, maybe it could be responded to in 30 days. It could be life or death. Because we've moved away from human scale, we're a one-size-fits-all culture. And that doesn't leave any room for weirdness and creativity, doesn't leave any room for making music. It just leaves room for the same thing. Maybe we have reached peak singularity. Maybe early on the singularity was about sharing cute cat videos. Now it's about getting upset about a political comment online, making an argument with somebody, and then hating them. Families splitting apart, people getting divided among social class, gender, race, because they're upset with each other, and the social network's just making money off these divisions. We have to make a future together. We have to look instead at human universals. Everybody wants to belong. Everybody wants to eat with friends. Everybody might want something to believe in, whether they're atheist or not, but they can believe in science, but people want to do something. And oftentimes the answer is having people do something at human scale instead of this big scale. So how do we design calm technology? Because I can talk about the philosophy of what we should do, but it means nothing if we don't go back in time and see what Mark Weiser and John Seely Brown said. The very first thing they said is that technology shouldn't take up all of our attention, just some of it and only when necessary. A silly example of this is just a tea kettle. A tea kettle, you set it, you forget it, it shouts to you when it's ready. It's not entirely calm, but you can do something else. You're not staring at it, you're not Bluetoothing into the tea kettle and having a countdown. You're not updating the software on the tea kettle. It's a tea kettle, either analog, where it works under its own heat, or you plug it into the wall. And this is a really important thing to remember, is that the tea kettle, you can do something else while this is happening, and it will tell you when it's done. This is using peripheral attention. So right in front of our vision, we have high-resolution visual attention. As we go out, we have lower-resolution attention. We can hear things, we can feel things through touch. We have lower resolution, but we still have information. A lot of our culture right now in tech is about focusing you in on this small screen, whether it's a pad or a tab or a board, as Mark Weiser called it in the 80s. This is a small world. This is the idea of the desktop computer. When we were in the desktop era, you could sit in front of a computer. It had battery life, it had bandwidth, it had high resolution, and you had focus. Suddenly, when we started taking these out of our houses and into our pockets and having portable desktop computers, it doesn't work. You can't be sitting there in your car with your phone like this, because you forget what's going on around you. Cars were built with peripheral attention in mind. They even have a foot pedal. You don't have to look at the pedal. You don't have to look at the accelerator. You don't have to push a button on a touchscreen to accelerate the car. It uses more of you. Everything is about keeping your primary focus on the road, and you glance up and back in order to get that information. What technology in your life allows you to get information with a glance without getting all of your attention taken away? So this is about informing and calming at the same time. You can add information into the environment in an ambient awareness kind of way. A silly example is this idea of a weather-based light bulb. So this is my old house in Portland, Oregon, and it usually rains in Portland, but every once in a while it's sunny. So my old co-founder and I made this light bulb that changes color based on what the weather will be for the day. So instead of these very pristine-looking videos where a single San Franciscan guy with a perfect English accent, perfect American English accent, wakes up in the morning and gets a disembodied voice telling him what the weather is going to be, which nobody wants, you walk into the kitchen, which means you're kind of awake, and you can feel, based on the temperature, the light temperature, what it will be like that day. Very least amount of tech, weather report. I walked into my kitchen this morning, the light was yellow, I knew it would be sunny. Most of the time I walk in the kitchen, the light is blue, I know it's going to be rainy. If I want higher resolution information, I can look at the iPad that I installed on the wall. It's totally not necessary. But you can get a feeling, a human feeling of something before you get the high resolution information. It's not being thrown at you. You have a choice whether you want more. And I think that choice is really important. How many things can you do? If you're a developer, maybe you could put the status of your servers in lights around the wall so that everybody understands. But you don't have to read anything. There's no audio telling you something. So this is a really important thing to remember as we try to automate. Every time we try to make a computer that acts like a human, we end up making humans act like a computer. We end up having humans on pause. Every time I have a voice interface that I'm trained culturally in a movie that I can talk to a computer, right? We always see this, you can talk to a computer in a movie. But the way that somebody understands, the way that a computer understands a human voice is not the same. And so even though it speaks in a human voice, we expect to be able to speak to it at the same level. And yet when we do, we often have to repeat ourselves. We are the ones that sound like a robot. You find a 5-year-old kid that's really good at Amazon Alexa, and they're often saying this robotic voice, very articulate. The original idea, one of the original ideas of cybernetics, is that we go back to the original idea of technology, which is tool use. You are using a tool alongside you to get something done, to go further with something. Google doesn't make the decision for you. It uses robots to scrape through all sorts of information, and it gives you a choice. It's doing 80%, 90% of the work for you, but you're the one that's making the decision. A recommendation system is different from the computer making the decision for you. This is why Amazon works. It's giving you recommendations. It's not telling you what you should buy. There are some things that we should absolutely automate. Like if we're going to continue to mine resources, we should have robots do that. It's very dangerous for humans to do that. This is my friend Todd Huffman, and he was upset because grad students and postdocs were in labs taking tissue samples, and it was very time-consuming. It hurt your eyes, it hurt your wrists. And instead of doing interesting work about solving cancer and doing experiments, they were scanning tissues, preparing slides and scanning tissues. So he made a robot that would take a three-dimensional tissue sample, cut it, scan it while it cut, and then upload it to a database. And the most important thing about the database is it's not an AI that's determining if it's going to be cancer or not. It's a doctor that votes on when it became cancerous or not, what kind of cancer it was, and then everybody can see that. So because it's a human plus a machine working side by side in a feedback loop, it's stronger than simply an AI or a single human doctor. It's this network. And I think that's an important thing to remember, that we think that we can make an AI that's better than us, and that's often because of film. But we need to realize that AI is its own species. Like a dog, we wouldn't want a dog to be human. We recognize that dogs are different. We still work with them and work alongside them. AI thinks its own weird way. Let's let it think that way and figure out how to work alongside it and let it amplify the best part of that so that we can add ourselves over here. Garry Kasparov, the chess champion, talks about the concept of a centaur, that a mediocre chess player with a good system can outperform an expert chess player. And I think we have to remember that we don't have to be perfect at everything, but with good systems, we can do a good job, as long as we still have human autonomy and we see what the system is doing. A lot of automation amplifies and keeps the kind of institutionalized racism, whoever has the bias, it propagates it through. So we have to we can't have them be copyrighted. We have to see the data that they're working with. Otherwise, it could be bias, and we could just trust it blindly. Because it's humans building these machines. And we have to remember that everything is still being built by humans, even if it's somebody programming an AI. The human who programmed it is going to propagate that all the way through. Technology can communicate, but it doesn't need to speak. We don't want everything to speak at us. It's really annoying. It interrupts us. This is why I like the Roomba vacuum cleaner, at least the early one. This is not a very good vacuum. It doesn't clean the corners. It's kind of slow. It stumbles around. But when it's done, it goes dun-da-da-da. And when it's stuck, it goes dun-dun. These are human universal tones. A 2-year-old can understand them. You don't have to translate this into a bunch of different languages to have somebody understand that the vacuum is done or it's stuck. And remember those pocket pets, the little Tamagotchis? So these were so special because they weren't very good. There's this little creature that needed your help. It would die if you didn't press a button and feed it. We loved them because we had to take care of them. We love the Roomba because it's not very smart. We have to take care of it. Because the assumption is that you don't have a perfect device, you make something that's not perfect, and we find it cute, and we help it out. When we help something out, we become bonded to it. And also, if we think about Star Wars, C-3PO might know 2 million languages, but he's annoying in every single one of those languages. R2-D2 beeps, and we have no idea what R2 is saying, but we think he's super adorable, right? So the tonal stuff, the tonal design is often much more successful, because if you make something in any specific language, you can't export it to another country unless you translate it. That's why at the beginning of a lot of Pixar films, we have the silent film, and it's always about a human universal. It's always about something that never changes. People ask about, how do you keep up with technology? And I say, you don't need to. You just always think about what will always be true for 5,000 years. We'll still have hammers. We'll still need to get something done. How do we design with the least amount of tech to solve the problem? Every single new feature has to be maintained. Every new code base has to be believed in, especially if it's open source. People like to move around. I like the programming language COBOL because it's still running most of the ATMs in the world and a lot of the flight software. It was made as a system that couldn't fail. And so it's very hard to work with, but it doesn't need to be updated a lot. We make a lot of software right now that has to be updated all the time. When we released it for CD-ROM, and you had to mail out a CD-ROM every 2 years, you really had to make sure it was good, because you could not go to everyone's house and say, sorry, we have to do an update. You had to be really diligent about finishing something. I like streetlights, because they're like a punctuation for reality. They're also universal. Everywhere in the world has a streetlight. You can go anywhere and understand what the street is trying to tell you. And the toilet occupied sign on the airplane is useful. You don't need augmented reality glasses to see it. You don't need a $1,000 headset and a Wi-Fi connection. You just have an icon. It's universal, even if you're red-green colorblind. These are boring technologies, but they're successful. And if we look at the early era, the original apps were home appliances that did save our time. They sat in a corner, we could press a button, they did stuff for us. How do we make tech like that? That's around and we can do something that always works? Like electricity. We don't have to Wi-Fi access the electricity. If we had electricity today, like we did the web, the electricity in here would be all over the place. Sorry, you can't turn on the light switch. There's not enough network available for your light switch. The whole point of electricity was to be invisible. And if you're an electrician, you have to be certified to work with electricity. It's dangerous. Maybe we should say the same thing about code. Code is dangerous. It can kill people. It can cause people to commit suicide if you poke at them long enough with a bad social network message. It can cause people to attack others. It can cause people to do all sorts of things. Maybe we should treat it like electricity. Right now, most of what we use online is far away. In the desktop era, everything was close. You didn't need network access. You could make your Word document and print it and bring it into school. So we didn't have the distractions. Maybe you played some video games. And maybe this is a complicated graph, but the idea is that early on, computers were far away from you. Then the desktop brought all your information close and your computers close. Now we have devices in our pockets, but we're using information that's far away. Maybe we can have something in the middle. All of your health information is with you, and when you take it to a doctor, they can make a diagnosis, add the information to your file, and you can take it home with you. That way, when somebody hacks into the medical database, they only get what's shared for the last 30 minutes, not everybody's information. And I think this is important, that every company will be hacked, that everything is insecure. And if we assume that everything's insecure, we can change how we build things. Because every company needs to be able to work on the same thing, getting something done, but they can't be a security expert at the same time. And storing everything in the cloud is just too exciting for hackers. It's too easy to hack into everything. And with that said, it's really important that in the past, you could have a radio or a television repair person down the street. Kids would learn how to build things, become electrical engineers by taking apart the family television set, and then the parents would get mad. They'd have to put it back together and learn about it. They'd go get a job at a repair shop. Things were simple enough that you could take apart your car. You could fix your sewing machine. You could learn how to sew. You could learn how to cook. Everything was about this small individual thing. You could have a hobby. You could build a model train. You could build a plane. You could build a boat. You could build your house. You could be a contractor. You could nail something to a wall. Now, how much of the things that we use can we actually maintain or build ourselves? Do we see any depth anymore? Are we adding our imaginations to anything? I feel that there's a kind of disconnect that makes us, there's like a French word, anomie, that maybe you're not entirely connected to things anymore. And I think this is a problem. So if good design allows you to get you to your goal in the least amount of moves, And a very good designer, maybe even a furniture designer, tries to take away those steps until there's nothing left to take away. And then a calm technology does the same thing, allows you to accomplish the same goals with the least amount of mental cost. Because, as Mark Weiser and John Seeley Brown, everybody might agree with, isn't a person's primary task to be a human? To be able to have time to watch a sunset? Are we really living if all of our free time is taken up by notifications? Do you remember your last internet binge? Or do you remember the last time you read a good book or wrote a journal that was for you and not for Instagram? Because the scarce resource is not technology. Technology is cheap. It's our attention and what we do with it. We don't have that long to live. What are you actually doing with your life? I got mad that Mark Weiser died and then nobody remembered calm technology, so I wrote a whole book on it for designers. And then I realized that sound and beeps and alarms are terrible, so I wrote a book on how to make them slightly better. I also uploaded all these papers and research on calmtech.com. I would encourage you to read them. There's a great paper called The Technologist's Responsibility. It's about ethics, privacy, location tracking. It was written in 1989, I think, or 1991. It's the same thing as today. Nothing changes, so let's think about what really matters. Thank you so much.